But I dreamed what he had said like the warmth of Walt Whitman's last breath, and the feeling you get when you see yourself weeping in the mirror, with the knowledge you can never be famous enough, you can never be rich enough, you can never get goofed up enough. The volcano of time is spilling into your village, and all you can do is light a cigarette off the magma and laugh and struggle with your brothers and sisters. Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I get to talk about Wildcat Dreams in the Deathlight by Reagan M. Sova. This is a book that is out from one of my favorite presses, First to Knock. Not that there was any doubt in my mind about the taste of First to Knock editors, but the fact that this manuscript made it into print shows very shrewd insight into what constitutes a worthy and great piece of literature in our time. But I want to do something a little different than what I normally do in my videos. I want to actually read the author bio that's included. This is a new author to me. It says Reagan M. Sova is an American living in Belgium. Beautiful country, by the way. I've spent a lot of time in Ghent and Bruges. His writing career began when he was orphaned at the age of 16. At that time, Sova developed an idiosyncratic gambling method in the casinos of northern Michigan. These bets financed a flight to Paris, where at 20, he first discovered the power of literature. Since then, Sova has produced poetry and prose that have been featured in Ghost City Review, Common Dreams, and Expat Press. I just recently reviewed a book from Expat Press, that being The Moon Down to Earth by James Newlick. He also authored Tiger Island out from Harvard Square Press in 2017, which was an alternate history novel about water privatization, soccer, anarcho-syndicalism, and WikiLeaks. In addition to writing poetry and fiction, Sova serves as a writer and editor at the European Institute for Animal Law and Policy, a Brussels-based think tank that seeks to advance the interests of animals in European law and policy. So suffice it to say, this is a very, very interesting author whose life is obviously going to open up avenues of thought and characterization and movement in literature that we won't see in other lives. The first thing that's so interesting about the work proper is that it's written as an epic narrative poem. This is something we just don't see much of anymore. And in fact, what we have is an American epic narrative poem. Yet, I can't decide if this is America filtered through a lens of the world or the world filtered through the lens of America, because it's a globe-trotting atlas of the world. The main character, Mort Sloman, whose first name in French means death, is very adamant about debunking the label of white American and asserting his Hebraic heritage. And so our main characters are this Jewish Sloman, the woman he falls in love with, who is a gypsy in a traveling circus, Frederick, an American black man, and a whole host of other melting pot combinations and permutations of identities. Because what kicks this whole epic off is this race that involves Mort's adoptive father, Frank, that culminates in this quest to, yes, pay homage to Frank, but also to achieve retribution and redemption for Frank. This is compounded when he joins the traveling gypsy circus and comes into contact with the aerialist, the beautiful and striking gypsy Nadezhda, whose mother asserts a sort of biblical waiting period. She posits these different locksmith keys that Sloman is to achieve, is to acquire over a period of many years. And he has rules that he must uphold. And if he satisfies all these requirements, he can have the hand of Nadezhda. In some ways, it reminded me of what Rudolf Wurlitzer does in his novel The Drop Edge of Yonder, with its metaphysical questing hemmed in by prophecy of the end of the journey. This narrative is much more than simply one man's quest or one troop's quest. There's a strong early 20th century American political element that pits the ills of oligarchical capitalism against the ideals of social democracy, especially those put forth by such figures as Big Bill Haywood and Eugene V. Debs. So, for an epic of American identity, furthermore, that's set around the closing of the 19th century and the opening of the 20th century, we progress up to and through World War I. We end somewhere finally around 1920, but we first meet Sloman when he's something like 11 or 13 years old, and we grow with him over these years and this globe trotting around the world from west to east and back again. And we get a much more nuanced and complex and more authentic view of American identity. The concept of the American everyman or everywoman is shattered and obliterated for the veracity of how it really was with this melting pot of ethnicities and cultures. But there are some pillars of American identity and the foundations of our young country. Two of those main pillars are love and opportunity, hence the falling in with the traveling circus and making money, and the being smitten with Nadezhda. And then, of course, the Judeo-Christian roots. This narrative almost reads like scripture. In the blurb on the back, the first adjective is incantatory. And whenever I think incantatory American epics type poetry, I'm always in the mind of Walt Whitman. And of course, Walt Whitman features in here, not the personage of Walt Whitman, but his poetry, his spirit, his artistic sensibility. Sloman is the son of Russian Jewish immigrants from Odessa and Gdansk. He was born on Fire Island in New York and then went out west. He was orphaned, which sort of mirrors what we read in the author bio. And we find that more than just the mere allusion or invocation of the fact of Walt Whitman and his poetry is in this text. Nadezhda tells Sloman, "Did you know you were born the day Walt Whitman died? Is that why words for your songs flow so freely from you?" One is almost tempted to call this the 21st century Leaves of Grass, but that wouldn't be quite right. It doesn't quite fit the bill. Here, unlike Leaves of Grass, the narrator isn't loafing and loaming and musing on blades of grass. This is a headlong narrative that looks at life as a circus and the circus as mirroring life. The circus is a place where mortals feel other mortals dance with death and desire, and the clowns laugh at man's sad, stupid vanity in the face of death. And later we get this allusion to Yeats. He says, "I have dreamed the falcon who always returns. I know through time for all men the whole world is a circus of death." And so, like I said, it's America, but filtered through the world, or perhaps the other way around, so that it achieves this global feel, this global relevance. Sloman says, "I had heard many Americans all my life tell me how foreign I was in the face in my food, even down to my striped shirt. But that French lady," this is in Paris, "said, 'Your speaking, your singing, your habits, I do not believe I have ever encountered anyone more American.' I said, 'Madam, I do not know if I should take that as a compliment or an insult, but I'm taking it.' She laughed again and said, 'This is exactly what I mean.'" And so what's interesting about reading this is that for me, I'm constantly identifying with such American tropes as the circus, as the journey, as the quest, as that spirit of opportunity and follow your dreams. But at the same time, every time I think that I'm seeing myself reflected in a mirror, I realize that I am seeing a foreigner in the mirror that's held up by another foreigner. And as Sloman begins to form such deep bonds with all of these people in his circus family, the narrative starts to weave this beautiful, multicolored, multi-vocaled, multi-sentimented tapestry. And don't get me wrong, there's much disaster, there's much heartache in this book, but it constantly keeps coming back to hope. And part of this is the temperament, is the personality of Mort Sloman. Just this indefatigable, restless energy and drive. There's no situation that gets him down. He builds others up. His enthusiasm, his mind, his words are contagious. And so everything keeps coming back to hope, hope, and hope. It's a book full of tragedy and yet full of hope. And this is life, learning to live with both at the same time. The other thing that you'll definitely notice, besides it just being the form of epic narrative poetry, is that it's completely stripped of syntax. There are no commas, no semicolons, no hyphens, no dashes. There is only enjambment, and the only capitalization comes with proper names. One of the things that I think this helps to highlight is how epic narratives and historiography, history in general, is constructed of people. People are the things that stand out. People are who we have, brothers and sisters, be they blood brothers like Sloman and Frederick, or biological brothers and sisters. That's what we have. We have each other. And so in the midst of this action-packed and, like I said, headlong narrative, there is much that I found extremely touching. I actually began to feel for these characters, to empathize with their situations, to cheer them on, to feel lost when they felt lost, to feel joy when they feel joy. We get these terrible, tragic glimpses of things that have happened to people. After all, my eye has seen the businessman sinking in quicksand, the two wild horses fighting to the death, the graves of my mother and twin, the youth gang blinding my father with an ice pick, the authorities burning my painting, the absurd misfortunes one after the other. I still believe in the honey, even if it is one drop among an ocean of sorrow, even if it is solidarity among siblings in a hopeless war. And I think that image of one drop of honey among an ocean of sorrow is the hope that fills this book. The book asks us to look deeper than the surface. Frederick refers to skin color as one's paint job. I love that. To try and think of an analog for Wildcat Dreams and the Deathlight, I don't know if there's anything that quite does it justice. On the one hand, it's constructed of influence by the Bible. The beats are in here. Mark Twain is in here. Whitman, of course. In the end, it's really its own thing. It stands out with its own style, its own take on so many familiar elements. Another thing that really stands out is that it's so nuanced, and details are chosen with such a keen eye for this type of writing that it reminded me of what Auerbach talks about in his oft anthologized Odysseus' Scar. And in Mimesis, of course, Auerbach is at this point trying to show representation and how representation differs between, say, the New Testament and Homer, with this showing us Odysseus' scar. Here we get this beautiful detail. It says, when Nadezhda was chewing peanuts, I swear it sounded like Duncan's horse galloping through the devastation afoot. Now, what really makes this hit is that Duncan's horse is no longer with them. This is sort of a ghost of the dead that's being channeled. But just think about this author, Reagan M. Sova, penning this narrative epic and then thinking of a character chewing peanuts and then linking that to the narrator hearing the way that sounds and linking it to these horse hooves galloping. I just thought that was one of a multitude of brilliant nuances that bring these characters and their thoughts and their feelings off the page. Probably the best way to describe it is that over and over while I was reading this, I had the feeling that these things had really happened. And it goes beyond just the historically true portions of this. Like I said, we link into the outbreak of World War I while they're traveling in Western Europe. They start to come into contact with the Germans. We get Big Bill Hayworth and Eugene V. Debs, these American socialists and unionists that started the Union for the Industry Workers, the IWW. And Sloman and the Traveling Circus will join these unionists. But it goes beyond just connecting to real historical fact. It's almost unsettling how real these events and these characters become, even though so much of Sloman's thought life has that Jewish mystical heritage of the evolution of the soul. To be quite honest, this is a very, very special book, and I'm prepared to start foisting this on all of my acquaintances. It just seems to have come out of nowhere, and it swept me up into its world. Listen to some of these brilliant lines. Frank handed me the instrument, moon moths fluttering, my eyes moistening. Moon moths fluttering. That will stick with me for a while. My dreams strum the guitar of the dead unknown poets. Sloman is looking at the field where the circus has just shut down and packed everything up, and he thinks, it must have been the saddest empty field in the world. Nothing is darker than the shadow of fun. I did see my life as a boat full of forgotten stories sailing off into a dream. And indeed, dreams, stories, words are so important, not only to the long and ancient heritage of Mort Sloman's relatives, but to the idea of the zeitgeist of the time. We will store all our anger and hope, the foundation of courage. That idea of courage being the product of anger mixed with hope, which is an interesting mix. Normally we think of joy as being mixed with hope or impending relief. Mort tells us, I stole hidden words in a country full of things I could not see. And you can feel this sort of conveyance or exchange going on during the course of the narrative, and adding to the idea of that mortal bridge that separates this life and the next. You can almost feel Mort Sloman as going back and forth, grabbing the unspeakable words from one end of the bridge and trying to bring them back to this world of the unknown and unseen words. Profiteers only have two ideas in their heads, two words in their vocabularies, more and war. This, of course, can connect to Wittgenstein's idea, once again, that looms over almost all literature, that the limits of our language are the limits of our world. And what a restrictive world it would be to only have these two words in your vocabulary. I don't know Reagan M. Sova, but it's incredible that any human was able to pull off something like this in 2022. Do not deprive yourself of the experience of Wildcat Dreams in the Deathlight by Reagan M. Sova, out from First to Knock.